Welcome to Talksicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged, the place where we talk about all things substance abuse, recovery, and mental health, with guests offering varying perspectives and viewpoints. Hosts Joseph Gordo and Jason Cabello share about their addiction and recovery and other serious subject matter through lighthearted yet candid conversation.
Jonah Bayer, thank you for coming on the show, especially in such short notice. I know we had just established you coming on yesterday, so appreciate you making the time, man, and welcome to the show.
Of course, yeah. Thanks so much. I'm so psyched to be here.
Yeah, so for the listener out here, it is going to sound on my end like Jonah and I have been best friends for decades, because I listen to his podcast. It's like my Monday night ritual. He has a podcast called How We Got Weird. Is that
How Did We Get Weird?
How Did We Get Weird? And it is a nostalgia podcast. And him and his sister Vanessa Bayer, they talk a lot about their childhood and nostalgia. And it's one of my favorite podcasts. So I've listened to every episode. So I feel like I know Jonah way more than Jonah knows me, so I'll probably just be like, oh yeah, I know that story about your childhood. I know that. But
well, I've been texting with you and Johnny Phillips, and so I feel like we have so much in common. I feel like we do have known each other a long time, even though we've only been talking for a couple of weeks, I guess.
We do. So we have a mutual friend, Johnny Phillips, who's been on the show before. Who's just a sweetheart of a man. I love him very much. Drummer for the band Limbic. And he connected Jonah and I, and, you know, guys of a certain age who are into a lot of the same music and the same culture. It's like our group chat just kind of took off, and it was like instantly just like, oh yeah. I think Jonah's one of his first entries was that he got to see Granddaddy and Elliott Smith, and I just knew that it was meant to be.
It's true. A long time ago, but it is true.
Wow. Was that before the Software Slump tour then? Was that off their first album?
I think it was on the Software Slump tour. It was like the Rolling Stone tour. It was a tour sponsored by Rolling Stone. And I can't remember what, but I remember that for the encore, Elliott Smith came out with Granddaddy and they played Don't Fear the Reaper together.
Whoa. That's pretty intense. Wow.
Yes.
I can't even, I'm trying to wrap my head around that, because I got to see Granddaddy, because I think they toured Software Slump for a while, and I think I got to see them probably on the second loop of it when I was living in Atlanta, and it was just, I mean, that's one of my favorite albums of all time, one of the best recorded albums, and just so tastefully done. I still listen to it, and then recently Jason Lytle released the all-piano version, which was also amazing.
Yeah, and Granddaddy has a new record out recently too, right?
I haven't listened to it yet, but I have seen it on my Spotify. It's popped up, so I'm everything that guy does, I'll give a listen to. I love the song. He did the song with like David Lynch and Danger Mouse when that Dark Night of the Soul came out. He had a song on there, which is amazing, and amongst a lot of other people.
Yes, for sure.
So, Jonah, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background, where you're from, who you are, what you do?
Sure. So I'm from Cleveland, Ohio originally. And I went to school in upstate New York in Ithaca College, and started going to shows. I was into punk and hardcore, playing in bands. I started doing a fanzine with a friend of mine called Law of Inertia. And so that was kind of my first foray into journalism. And then moved back to Cleveland, got a job as a music editor at Alternative Press. So I was there from 2002 to 2005. I was also in a band called The Love Kill. So we were on Jeff from Thursday's label, Astromagnetic. So quit AP, went on tour with this band. The band broke up. I moved to New York in 2007, and since then have just been writing about music. I play in a band, United Nations, with Jeff from Thursday. I did a web series with my sister, and now I went back to school in 2019. I moved to the Berkshires, got married, and went back to school for clinical mental health counseling. So now I work in community mental health, mainly write about the intersection of music and mental health, and I'm looking to get my independent license probably in early 25. So that's basically my story.
So that's a lot of why, Johnny and I connected us, just because, and I've heard you talk about it on your podcast, and that's a lot of what I do and what we do at Recovery Unplugged, and especially we could get into it a little bit more as we go on, but the new program that we're building called the Elsewhere program, which is so I was recently on tour with KISS doing their documentary. Their manager, Doc McGee, who is my family worked with Doc since I was probably right around the time I was born. My mom and stepdad were working with Doc McGee on a lot of projects. We all moved from Chicago to Miami together. My mom was running his office. My stepdad was engineering a lot of bands that he was working with at the time. So, he's like a father to me. But, we were talking. So I got clean at Recovery Unplugged 7.5 years ago. And I'm talking after like 25 years of like hardcore heroin addiction. So it was a place that really, really changed my life. And while we were on the road, Doc and I just started talking about, how tough it is on the road when you're just kind of, and that's where the name Elsewhere came from, is you just kind of feel you've toured. I mean, you've toured as a musician and as a journalist too. You just kind of get that feeling of, I know I'm in Chicago, but it's not like I'm experiencing anything from Chicago. I'm like getting up from the hotel, going to sound check, waiting around for a little bit, maybe get something to eat, the show, and then onward. And it's just a hard place to get any sort of mental health or, any kind of, if you're in recovery or seeking recovery, it's definitely a difficult place. So we've developed a program that is going to, help everybody on the tour, from, the road crew to the talent and everybody in between. Just something that we could offer. Base level services would be something as little as virtual services where you could have counseling. We could set up transportation to or bring in like 12-step meetings for the crew, and then if they need something, a higher level of care like medical detox on the road or sober coaching, we could offer all of those things. And it's just about to get off the ground now. We've been in the planning stages for the past 6 or 7 months, so it's about to take off. And I just think that, and everybody who we've talked to about it, musicians, managers, everything, is just like, we've needed this for a long time.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And yeah, I mean, Doc McGee, obviously, like, legendary manager. Like, I would love to hear some stories about that some other time also, because I'm such a fan of that era of music too. I know me and Vanessa always talk about how we found out we're related to Ricky Rackman.
Right.
And obviously, I've read all the books on those bands. The program sounds amazing. And yeah, that was one of the big things that, I should say I work now in community mental health and substance abuse. Mm-hmm. But I got interested in going back to school because of my experiences with musicians and sort of with addiction and also with anxiety, depression. And, I was really impacted by Scott Hutchison from Frightened Rabbit, was someone who had come on my old podcast, Going Off Track, and someone I was just such a massive fan of and friendly with. Yeah. And when he died by suicide, that was also, something that kind of pushed me to wanting to kind of help people and work with that population that I was already familiar with in so many different ways.
Yeah, I didn't realize how close you were with him, but that gave me chills when you mentioned that, because that was just like one of those devastating things, much like Elliott Smith too, when his I know it's kind of a subject that some people have opinions on one way or another, and I don't really want to get into all that, but when he allegedly died of a suicide, right, and it was you listen to some of his music and you could see like where he's checking in and saying like, I'm not okay. So at what point do you say like, this is an artist and this is what he does, and he writes about these dark things, maybe he's not like that? And same with your friend, and you could hear some of his music, and it's just, especially after the fact, it just like gives you chills when you hear some of the stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I wasn't like great friend. We had met a couple times and I had talked to him, but I had, he's someone who just impacted me so much through his music. And it's, I think it's just so devastating, but it's great. That he has his own charity now. His brother Grant made it in his name called Tiny Changes, and they do a lot of really good work with mental health and that kind of stuff now too. But yeah, it's a tough lifestyle. I actually, when I started doing this, actually got hooked up with that guy, Phil Toll, who was Metallica's therapist and Some Kind of Monster.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had a Zoom call with him, and it was really interesting. Cause he's a little, he's obviously of a different generation. But it was interesting to hear what it was like for him to kind of work with Metallica and sort of, the needs that a lot of these bands have and musicians have that are so unique to that sort of lifestyle. And really just like, the Arrested Development, like that's one of my favorite documentaries, but you watch them, it's like, these guys have like no idea how to communicate with each other.
Right. Yeah, no. And it's such, and one of the things where Doc's, hand in this is really, really helpful is he was just talking. He's like, every time these fucking people walk through an airport, somebody wants a piece of them, and it's
sure.
like, even if, you approach somebody and it's like, hey, I work in mental health and I'd love to, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, okay. They get it 100 times a day. And it's with Doc's point of view, he's just like, this needs to be done from the inside out. This needs to be, this, because, yeah, I'm not going to get into any specifics on this, but I get, there was somebody who had passed away from an overdose who had a sober coach in the hotel room next to them.
Okay.
And it was like, when a lot of times when you hire some of these people, their motivation, obviously in the beginning, could be that of, being a sober coach. But then if this person isn't holding up their end of the deal, are they going to lose their job and just say, I don't want to do this? Or are they going to stick around and keep trying? Are they going to confront management and say like, hey, listen, this isn't working. What are we going to do? So coming from a place of, Doc McGee knows pretty much everybody in the music business. Everybody knows Doc McGee, and his, we're doing a lot of models on his experiences to say like, we'll set a contract up with somebody if they need it. Not everybody needs a contract, but some people might. And in this, we could say like, here's your contract. You got to do this, this, and this. And if you're not doing this, we are going to be fully transparent. Obviously, they're going to have to give their consent that the manager is on board with this stuff, and so we don't break any HIPAA laws or anything like that. And that could be part of the contract to say like he performed or she performed X, Y, and Z, or did not perform X, Y, and Z. Do we want to break the contract here and just say this isn't working, and then you guys figure something else on, or do we want to figure something else out? So these are a lot of variables that somebody with that kind of experience really brings to the table.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. And I think it's, as a journalist, so many of the press releases I was getting from bands were like about mental health or about, their struggles with depression or anxiety or addiction. It seems like it's, especially with this like younger generation, this is like such, and there's so much more awareness around this stuff now. I feel like there wasn't really, when I was touring, people weren't like, maybe this is not good for us to be like sleeping in a van every night and
Right.
like scared our stuff is going to get stolen and making it's like, I think there's a lot more awareness around just the lifestyle and sort of the challenges and the pressures. And I think, there's different pressures when you're doing well than, I never was in like a huge band, but I imagine in that situation, then all of a sudden you have a whole staff and all these people depending on you. And so it's really hard to get the wheels stopped. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of interesting variables with it.
Yeah. And I think anybody could benefit from this as well. Like smaller bands, like traveling in a van, have a special set of needs, and my boss is going to watch this and probably flip his lid. But, for bands like that, I'd love to be able to just scholarship, give scholarships to smaller bands who just need like some mental health breaks or help like mapping out some stuff. Or if they're because we have Recovery Unplugged has locations. We're in Florida, we're in Nashville, we're in Austin, we're in the DC area. We just opened in South Carolina, in New Jersey. So we have places everywhere, and we have tons of partners everywhere. And if somebody needs like some help, maybe we could get them some help, and, understanding that they might not be able to afford it. But then the bigger bands can easily add $1 to the ticket price or something like this to pay for these services. Sure. There's just, a lot of ways that we could make this happen. And we've been talking to a lot of people in some nonprofits, Music Cares, Backline, Sims Foundation here in Austin, who also provide amazing services too. So, there's a lot of people who are like-minded, have the same goal in mind. So I think it's a great thing that we're able to bring something to the table. And, here's the thing. We don't want a monopoly on it. Like, we don't want to own treatment for musicians in recovery. We just want to be part of a solution, and, have partners that help out with it too. Cause it's a lifestyle that is just so overlooked. Everybody's like, oh yeah, the musicians, poor me. Like, you get to go on the road, but it is taxing. And, that's where they make their money now, is with touring. So they try to cram in as many dates, meet and greets, all these things. So it could be incredibly stressful.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
So what made you decide that this is what you wanted to get into, was working in mental health?
Well, it was a few things. It was kind of moving out of I was in Brooklyn or New York area for 11 years. And I had moved to a more rural area and was still freelancing and doing okay. But, the area, the bands I was writing in about, that I was an expert on were sort of like these early 2000s punk and emo bands.
Right.
And it was just becoming increasingly more difficult to make a living doing that. And, I did a podcast for about 7 years in New York called Going Off Track. A lot of those conversations were sort of turning more towards mental health, kind of unintentionally. I felt like it was something I liked talking about, and I was reading a lot about different sociology books and these things. So it felt kind of like a natural thing. Like, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, I need to kind of pivot into something, and probably like computer programming is like not going to be something that I'm good at. And this is sort of like a therapeutic conversation. In some ways, it's very similar to a journalistic conversation. Mm-hmm. In some ways, different. But so, yeah, it seemed like kind of a natural kind of change. And it's just, it's a long road. Like, I had to get a master's degree. Now I'm doing my postgraduate hours. You need 3,000 something hours here. So it's a big commitment. But at the same time, I do the podcast. I still write about music. I did a big feature. Spin has a big mental health and music site called Impact. And so it's like a big feature on Hot Water Music when their guitar player, Chris Woolard, he doesn't tour with them anymore because of his anxiety. So I talked to everyone in the band about his mental health and how it affected the dynamics. And so I really like talking and writing about that intersection. So it's really exciting. It's actually way more interesting for me to learn about EMDR or some of these like more psychological concepts than to like what kind of, like, who influenced this like new Simple Plan record or whatever. I mean, it's like, I feel like I did that for so long that this is kind of exciting to me. And I think it's all kind of connected in some kind of way. It's
awesome when something that you already do fits into something that you want to do, and you find that vehicle, like, oh wow, well, I already love doing this. This comes natural to me. I've been doing this half my life, and then now here comes something, and it being meaningful.
Yes.
It's not like you just found a way to like mine Bitcoin or something. Sit back and let it roll in. So that's really cool, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's came together really naturally. Yeah, probably maybe I'd be making more money if I knew how to mine Bitcoin, but maybe not. I don't know.
Not these days. I think it'd probably be you'd probably just break even.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be terrible.
Perfect.
So what years were you in New York?
So I moved there in '07, and I think I was there till about 2018, something like that.
Good years for music. I guess any year is a good year in music, and when you're living in New York City, it's some of my favorite stuff. I think I'm a few years older than you. I'm about to turn 50, so okay. Growing up, it was just so romanticized for me, like seeing all the early CBGB stuff, and then I saw a documentary called Style Wars when I was probably 7, and it was about like the New York City graffiti and breakdancing scene. And
oh, wow.
The imagery of that just like it stuck with me. And between that and wanting to be like an English soccer hooligan, like that was my childhood, seeing like the Jam and stuff when I was really young. Those are the things that really inspired me. So naturally I started getting into, hip hop and punk rock, and then ultimately hardcore is the thing that I started getting old enough to go to shows. And I grew up in Miami. So Miami was sort of a tough place for bands to travel to, just because, between, let's say, Gainesville or Orlando is a stop. And then to get to Miami, that's a 6+ hour drive with nothing in between, and then having to go back and forth. Like, not many bands wanted to come out there unless they could get like a few days rest. Like, Jane's Addiction would play there a lot because Perry Farrell is from North Miami Beach, so they would come out there a lot. And you would have a lot of like hardcore bands like Agnostic Front, who
they have a connection with Cuba or something, right?
Yeah. So Roger had family that lived, the singer for Agnostic Front, he had family that lived in Miramar, Florida, and his little brother, who sang for Madball, actually went to high school there. So there were some bands that had like connections that would be able to come back and forth, but it was a really tough place to get a lot of, quality bands from that were going on tour. So the music scene out there was weird. I mean, we had a lot of really great noise bands early on, but it was always something. It was just a little different than everywhere else. So, but it was a wonderful place, man, and just I would say like 1989, 1990, we started getting a lot of better high quality bands would start coming down, and like the punk and hardcore scene there was amazing, man. And I know that you grew up in listening to a lot of like punk hardcore stuff too, right?
Yeah, so I grew up in Cleveland, and my mom took me to see Guns N' Roses on the Illusion tour in '91. Skid Row was on the Slave to the Grind tour.
Another Doc McGee
was, like,
band.
Huge. What's that?
Another Doc McGee band.
I know, I was gonna say Doc was probably there.
Yeah.
But that was a really formative kind of experience for me. And then, I saw some wild shows there. I mean, I saw Green Day with Sam AM on the Dookie tour. I saw Soundgarden with Tad on the Super Unknown tour. And then like sort of like the first punk show I remember was actually Down by Law, Melancholy, and Good Riddance. And then I just started going to a lot of those types of shows and playing in bands and like covering the Misfits and doing what you do when you're like a teenager in the 90s, I guess. Yeah.
And then when did you start touring?
I played in my bands in high school, never really toured. I played in some bands in college, but really when I moved back, I graduated college in '02 and joined this band, The Love Kill. And that's when I sort of started touring more seriously. We went to Europe twice. We toured the States. We went out west. So that was really it. So I would say like 2002 to 2005. And then I moved to New York and we started playing with United Nations. And, we played a festival in Belgium. We toured the US. We went to the West Coast, but it's kind of more sporadic. And we haven't played a show now in probably 5 or 6 years. But really like the early 2000s. It's interesting because the Love Kill still has a website and it has every date we ever played on it.
Oh, wow.
So it's cool. And then it's just funny to look at. It's like, oh, we played this bowling alley with the Gaslight Anthem 20 years ago. Or, it's interesting to kind of look at it because it feels like it was just like so. But yeah, we played Gainesville Fest a bunch of times with both bands, and yeah, been all over pretty much. And and I've also traveled a lot I worked on the Warped Tour for a couple of years for AP, and then just like random stuff, like I would just go out with Thursday and just hang out. Or like I remember one time Limbeck stayed at my house in Cleveland, and they were like, "We're going to Canada for a few days. You should just come." And so I just like jumped in the van, and so a lot of just hanging out and just taking up space, basically.
Yeah. You had mentioned that on your podcast, and that's when I had that was probably like a year or so ago. And I was listening to it, and I had texted Johnny. I was like, "Holy shit! They were just talking about you on the podcast. That's amazing." Then he told me the whole story about he told me basically the same thing that you just said. So
yeah, they were on tour with they were on tour with Cartel, The Early November, and Newfound Glory.
Newfound Glory are Hometown Boys.
Yes.
I know those guys. I know I used to skate a lot with Chris from Dashboard Confessional. Yep. And a lot of it was a very tight scene in South Florida. So like everybody knows everybody, and even there's quite a few years between like me and Chad from Newfound Glory, or me and Chris are probably around the same age, but we skated together a bunch. And this was probably before or maybe just during like the beginning of Vacant Andes.
Yeah, I mean, what I find interesting about Chris is like, I know he was also, he's known obviously so well through Dashboard, but that scene, like the bands like Morning Again and like Culture and like kind of like those much heavier bands, I felt like he was very into that scene as well. It was interesting that area had like a lot of kind of crossover with the more kind of metallic hardcore, it seems like.
Yeah, Culture,
which I love.
Culture, Rich Thurston was an old friend of mine. Me and him used to be kind of hoodlums together back in the day, and he was the guitar player for Culture. Okay. So yeah, I know grew up with all those guys, and very small scene.
Yeah, Cleveland was very much like into that kind of more metallic hardcore scene, because obviously like Integrity was from there, and then there was a great band from my era called Ascension, and a lot of these more kind of metal influenced hardcore bands. That was like what I was very into. Yeah, when I was younger. Yeah,
like the late 90s. Like Earth Crisis kind of stuff.
Yeah, the whole like Victory Records, California Takeover, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that predates that just a little bit were the bands that started coming to Miami or Fort Lauderdale a lot more. Like Sick of It All would come down a lot and play, and we would go see them. Sheer Terror made it down there one time, and that was one of the most violent shows I've ever seen in my entire life, and it was just it was incredible. But
yeah, I was also obsessed with like the North Florida like hot water music and the whole Gainesville No Idea Records kind of scene as well. That obviously,
yeah. One of my best friends. I wasn't very adventurous then. I'd go more on skate trips than I would to go see bands, but I would go. One of my best friends, Steve, moved up there, and then I would start going up there and going to shows at like the Hardback and all those places. So they had a great scene out there. But yeah,
for sure.
Hot water music though. So yeah, tell me more about the stuff that you're doing with Spin.
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of write for them. They have a really great editor, Dan, who gives me a lot of great assignments. And yeah, the impact stuff, it's more, like I said, more the intersection of music and mental health. So I did an interview with Pierce from Soul Glow recently too. Basically, it's kind of similar to what we're talking about kind of things that he does to cope with being on the road. And one of them was like, he like brings a weighted blanket. And so just trying to kind of write more about that kind of intersection, how people deal with things on the road, advocacy, that kind of stuff. Any way I can kind of like shoehorn my way into that spot, I guess. And so they have like a special kind of mini site for that. But I've also done some writing for like Travel and Leisure, about emotional support animals. And so trying to think what else. All kinds of, it's kind of all over the map a little bit.
Yeah. So what do you think from your experience, what would you like to see change in the world of, touring and musicians and the.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's I haven't toured like post-COVID, and I know it's like the economics of it. My understanding is like it's changed a lot. Like it's gotten much more expensive to do, obviously, to do anything. And so, yeah, I think like, obviously bands being compensated better. I mean, I think that's obviously complicated, but, I think it's good. These venues kind of like taking less merch cuts, allowing bands to keep more of their own money. But yeah, I think more awareness around, what people are going through, what's okay and what isn't, because it's tricky. Because I think in some ways touring is just difficult. Like, and it's no matter how comfortable it is, it's still hard to be away from home. It's hard to be away from your family and friends. But how can you make it so it's not, driving people into more self-destructive behaviors, that they're still managing their own self-care? And I don't really have an answer for that exactly, but I think just bringing more awareness to the conversation. And like you said, access to therapy, I think, is a big one. It can be hard to find a therapist. As a therapist, you're generally only licensed in one state at a time. So
Right.
Technically your client has to be in that same state. And there are, there's coaching, there's other things. But yeah, I think there's a lot of logistical kind of things that make it complicated, especially when you're moving around. Maybe you don't have great internet. I mean, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, I had a conversation recently with Christy Williams, who has a foundation called Shade the Limelight, which kind of helps young musicians not fall into the traps of like getting exploited by the music industry. She's mother of Hayley Williams from Paramore.
Okay, yeah, I remember her from the Warped Tour, early 2000s Warped Tour.
Right, so she was like, I mean, I would even
there.
call it a momager. She was like, she homeschooled the band and was really like more of a den mother, And,
yeah, they had Wi-Fi on their van in like 2002, and it like blew my mind. I was like, this is unbelievable.
Yeah,
because they were yeah. So yeah, I remember for sure.
And she's a very strong advocate about this. And when we were talking, what she was saying was that, what do you think the first thing that's going to get cut on the day sheet is if time's running behind, or they need to get somewhere? It would be any sort of time where the people get their mental health breaks or time to just relax or something like that. So I think it's going to take a lot of agreements between sort of everybody from tour managers, maybe even venues, to make sure that this is, this becomes normalized, to give the people just a little bit, whatever it is they need, because like I said, when I was on that tour with 7.5 years clean, almost, like I was starting to struggle, and it's like, I couldn't, you wake up, you might have half a day to do something and you're in a strange town. It's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to go find a meeting. Like, I need to sleep.
Right.
I need to maybe wash some clothes or something. And how fast paced it seems. And then sometimes how time just drags on when you're in that in between. What was that old Air documentary? The eating, sleeping, playing, and waiting.
Yeah, and there's all this extra stuff because I did a cover story on Paramore for AP when Riot came out.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a long time ago. But I rode with them on their bus for a few days, and I remember like, yeah, they play a show or do soundtrack, and then like they'd had to go to like a cell phone store and like do some kind of like, I don't know, like Nokia. It's like there's all, and like you said, now it's all these meet and greets and an acoustic set and all this stuff. And yeah, it's like there's not a lot of downtime, or it feels like there's sound check and then there's like nothing to do for like 9 hours.
Yeah. But that, on the other side, there is a lot more availability for virtual mental health services too. So, I mean, you can hop on a Zoom call with a therapist or get in a group meeting, but, if you've got 3 hours and, most likely you're probably just going to jump on your phone and scroll through Instagram or
Sure. Sure.
listen to your podcast or something like that, which could be
Sure.
therapeutic. Not saying that it's not, but it's that's why I think there has to be the time chiseled out for it to make sure that, I mean, and these are obviously my opinions. I'm not, I don't have all the answers or anything like that, but I'm trying to find a way to just do any part of it. 'Cause I was on the panel for South by Southwest and they asked like, what would you do to change the world if you had? And I was like, well, that's a great question, but I think I'm just going to start granularly and continue to do what I'm doing, is just finding this one little space where I could make some sort of difference. Or even if it's just that I put a couple people together that find a way to make the difference, like I'm all for all that. It's just getting the conversation going a little bit further.
For sure. And I think, even if you don't have access to a therapist, like I've had like a really long like Ashtanga yoga practice. And so I think just doing these more contemplative practices or more embodied practices or going for a run or doing anything that kind of gets you out of your head, gets you out of like some like, bar that's just covered in like stickers and smells like cigarette.
Right.
Just like any kind of change of environment can be good. And obviously that depends on like the time of the year where you are and stuff. But yeah, anything like that, I think, can be positive.
Yeah, and I have a friend, Dan Martin, goes by his DJ name was Dormouse. He was a big like gabber DJ and rabid following, and he found recovery and was very early on in the CrossFit movement. I think he started the first CrossFit gym in Miami, and just that's where he found his way, was fitness. But he actually started a program called I'm With the Band, which is a full workout thing with just a little band that you could fit in your backpack. And he made a program for people on tour. It's just like, hey, if you have a motel room or the parking lot of a motel room, here's some stuff that you could do to get a little bit of physical fitness in, or maybe even a jump rope, or just something that'll, give you a little bit of time to get away from that and just be in your own little space for a while.
Yeah, totally. I think that's awesome. I know like Duff McKagan is really into like jump roping too. I read his book and I was like, I got to get he's obviously in great shape, super sober. And so I've been wanting to get a jump rope, but haven't gotten around to it yet.
Jump roping has changed my life in the past.
Really?
I would say a year, maybe a little bit under a year ago, I taught, like, because I could not jump rope, because it's funny, because skating for so long, every time I would try to do it, my feet would go like an ollie. So I would lift one foot up before the other and I'd always trip, but I finally, and I would just, so I would get up at like 3 a.m. and I have a 24-hour gym here, and they have one of the, like the wood panel rooms with the mirrors. And I would just go in there and I taught myself how to jump rope little by slowly. And now I could go for like a couple hours a day. And,
wow.
I just get into that sort of, I guess a flow state is what they call it, to where I'm just like, I'm not thinking of anything. I'm just doing that. And I lost a good like 15 pounds doing it. It's helped my skating, and it's, I highly recommend it. I would highly recommend it.
Well, I may have an advantage because I've never been able to ollie, so that wouldn't be a problem for me.
Well, maybe if you get the jump ropes, you could finally get. It's never too late. It's definitely never too late. That's honestly another thing that kept me clean, because I got clean when I was 42, and one of my best friends in the world, who I was in treatment with, named Mike Demchek, we were in treatment. And turns out we both skated, so we just started talking about it. And once we got out of like the PHP area, which is like where you sleep there when you're living in like a halfway house, we started just going skating. And we would just go and skate curbs in a garage, and I fell back in love with it 100%. And sometimes I skate like 5 days a week now still, and I'm, coming on 50 years old, and it's the community is amazing here in Austin. I have a bunch of friends that I skate with all the time, a bunch of guys my age, and it's just really, and I love the culture of it. That's one thing I've always, since I started skating in like 88, I've completely followed it and know everything and read every magazine front to back, watch all the videos. So that's something that's really, really been
I've been watching those Thrasher videos. They have this series,
King of the Road.
No, it's like where like they're trying a trick and it like
Oh, My War.
My War.
Yeah.
Yes. And they're so incredible just watching these guys just like fall over and over and like their whole process and the mental aspect and then them finally landing it. And it's like, I love those videos.
Yeah, Thrasher makes some great content, man. I really love what they do, and they've really stepped it up in the last couple years. And since physical media has gone away and everything comes at you like 2 or 3 minute clips, they've done a really good job of making skate videos in bite-sized pieces. Like now a skate video will be like 8 minutes long, and it's like I'll watch that, But it's and like I said, Austin has an amazing skate scene, and we have great. Like I could drive probably an hour in any direction and find a skate park that I haven't skated yet, and I've lived here for 4 years.
Yeah, that's incredible, and it's not snowing, so that's great too.
We did have a pretty substantial snowstorm here a couple years ago that still. I mean, nothing compared to what you would get in Cleveland or New York, but we just didn't have, we don't have like salt trucks or anything like that out here.
Sure.
So when it does happen, it's like the city does shut down, and it's that was really scary. And then last year we had an ice storm, which was crazy to see here in Austin, and it's the weather here is pretty wacky. Lots of hail stuff too. But yes, we don't have full winters of knee deep snow and stuff like that, but well, we're getting near the time of this, and I know I'm on you do have the best segments on the show, the little games afterwards, the yes or nostalgia, and you played yourself, and the what's the one from the Cleveland Plain Dealer that you did?
That is Legit Moan or Necessary Groan.
Yeah. Those are amazing. I love
those. Are fun. Yeah, unfortunately I've like exhausted the archives online of those, so it's hard to find new ones.
Oh, those are so funny. But we have our own version here, and it's called Rapid Fire Question Time. Are you ready?
It's Rapid Fire Question Time.
I'm ready.
Okay. What was the last skateboard trick that you landed?
Just standing on a board. I built a board recently. So I stood on it. It doesn't have wheels or trucks, but I would count that as something.
All right, that's a good start. Yeah. I like that. All right, what is an album or band that you would assume, knowing what kind of music you like, that you love, but you really just, I'm not going to say can't stand, but just don't like?
Can't get into Talking Heads. I don't know. I like a lot of that early CB stuff. I get their historical relevance, but to me, it's like Ramones, Television, Blondie, all that stuff is cool. Talking Heads, just a band I just never have been able to totally get into, even though I understand their importance.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Have you ever had a supernatural experience, a ghost, a UFO?
I don't think so. Although I did once have Reiki done to me. I had a Reiki session, and I was very skeptical about it. I was like, I don't know if this is real. And I really felt like the energy moving. Like I felt this person's hands over me, and I felt, I think it was in Ecuador or something. And I was like, whoa, this is legit. It felt almost supernatural, the way the energy was moving, and I could actually feel it.
Right. Okay. What is your pump up song? So you're about to go for a big run. You don't feel like it, whatever it is, you feel like crap. Could be a guilty pleasure, something that just instantly changes your mood.
I am obsessed. You this may ring a bell for you. The Civ album, Set Your Goals.
Oh yeah.
I recently I'm working with Sammy and Arthur on a project, and so I've been revisiting that record, and it's like I listened to it today. Like I can't stop listening to it. It's so catchy. The recording, the songs, it's like that album just like gets me so pumped.
that whole Gorilla Biscuits is so one of the best shows I've ever seen. Was like Gorilla Biscuits, Bold, Youth of Today. They all came to Miami, and it was fucking legendary.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good one. That's a good pump up one. Okay, and final question. What are the burdens of being the son of the first Todd?
Yeah, so if your listeners don't know, Vanessa and I talk a lot about how our dad thinks he's the first person named Todd. And he's, kind of built a name for himself around that. The burdens of it, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot to live up to. There's, Jonah's been around for a long time as far as a name. It's biblical. So, yeah, it's a lot to live up to, but it's also very exciting and very I wouldn't have it any other way.
Good. Yeah. So yeah, I'm dropping a lot of little Easter eggs for your podcast here. Obviously, I'm a huge fan. So, all right, Jonah. So the floor is yours. Anything you want to say? Anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to promote?
Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. Yeah, Vanessa and I have a podcast called How Did We Get Weird? It comes out every Monday on iHeartMedia and Big Money Players. I have a website, jonahbayer.com, where you can check out my writing, music. And then, I'm doing, like I said, I work full-time in mental health now. I'm hopefully will be licensed early next year and hope to work with more bands and musicians and artists and other creative people on mental health issues and therapy and coaching and all kinds of stuff. So feel free you can sign up on my website. I have like a mailing list. I've never actually sent anything out with it, but maybe I will someday. And I'm also on Twitter at Jonah and Bayer. And I'm just very excited, for what you're working on and all the work that you're doing with artists, and just really hoping to just find a way to kind of work in those two worlds and kind of help people and, improve the situation for people, because like you said, it's a really tough lifestyle. It can be very glamorous, but it can also be really, really difficult. And so I think bringing more awareness to that and that conversation is super important.
Great, man. Well, once again, I'm so glad we connected. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice. Welcome back anytime. Come out to Austin sometime. Let's maybe go see a Limbeck show sometime together. Or
oh my gosh, that would be amazing. Yeah, we played United Nations played South by Southwest, but it was probably like 10 years ago or something. I don't think I've been back, but yeah, that would be great. And I would love to see Limbeck. I haven't seen Limbeck in so long. So maybe hopefully they play again.
ACL's coming up, so if you want to get the boys together for a reunion, ACL's that come. It's October here, so.
Okay. All right. We can talk about it on the group chat and maybe get Johnny to do it.
All right. Jonah Bayer, thank you so much, man. And as we always say here at Talksicology, there's 1,000 ways in, 1,000 ways out, and we hope you find yours.